Chevy Chase was born Cornelius Crane Chase on October 8, 1943, into a world that, on paper, promised everything a child could want. His family name carried weight, wealth, and influence. The Chase lineage traced back generations of power and privilege, and his father, Edward Tinsley Chase, was a prominent physician. Yet, behind the ornate facades and manicured lawns, young Cornelius's life was anything but idyllic. Wealth could not shield him from the sharp edges of human cruelty, and from the earliest days, he encountered a paradox: the trappings of comfort paired with the sting of neglect and abuse. Chevy's mother, Catherine, was mercurial and harsh. Discipline, when it came, was unrelenting, leaving emotional scars that would quietly shape his worldview. His stepfather, a stern man with little patience for childish folly, added another layer of rigidity to a home already governed by rules and expectations. In a house where appearances mattered more than affection, young Chevy learned early to mask pain with performance. Laughter became a shield, a language through which he could assert control over a world that often felt unpredictable and cruel. And school offered no sanctuary. Despite his family's social standing, Chevy struggled to conform to the strict codes of elite institutions. Expulsions became a pattern, first at prestigious prep schools and then at other private academies, each departure leaving a trail of whispered reputations. He became known not just for defiance, but for his cunning pranks and audacious humor. Teachers and peers alike remembered him as a trickster, a boy who could transform a classroom into a stage with the right mix of timing and nerve. Yet, beneath the jokes lay a deeper truth. Comedy was not merely a pastime, it was survival. If you could make people laugh, you could redirect attention from your own wounds, and perhaps, just for a moment, gain power in a world where you often felt powerless. Family dynamics further complicated his formative years. The juxtaposition of extreme wealth with emotional instability created an inner tension that would follow him into adulthood. At home, he witnessed the contradictions of privilege. Material abundance contrasted sharply with the scarcity of warmth and understanding. It was a lesson he would carry into his career. Appearances could charm, entertain, and deceive, but they rarely revealed the whole story. In many ways, this early exposure to duality, glamour versus reality, prefigured the trajectory of his life in Hollywood, where public adoration often concealed private struggle. Amid this turbulence, Chase found solace in humor. From a young age, he cultivated a sharp observational eye, noting the absurdities of human behavior and crafting them into performances that amused and occasionally unsettled those around him. Pranks, impersonations, and witty retorts became his tools, both defensive and expressive. Friends and relatives later recalled a boy who could command attention effortlessly, who had an uncanny ability to turn even a bleak situation into a moment of levity. It was as if he instinctively understood the mechanics of comedy, long before he would step onto a professional stage. Yet humor alone could not erase the lingering effects of his upbringing. The emotional turbulence of his childhood, punctuated by harsh criticism, inconsistent affection, and rigid discipline, planted seeds of insecurity that would resurface in his adult life. Confidence could be projected, but vulnerability remained buried beneath layers of performance. This tension between persona and private self would become a recurring theme, one that marked both his comedic genius and his later conflicts in Hollywood. It is a paradox familiar to many performers. The very traits that make one a star can also exacerbate the fractures of a fragile inner life. Even as he navigated elite schools and social expectations, Chase began testing boundaries with a fearless, almost reckless energy. Expulsions were not merely acts of rebellion, they were statements of independence, a refusal to be confined by the rigid structures imposed upon him. In hindsight, these early defiance patterns foreshadowed the clashes he would later have with authority figures in the entertainment industry, from producers to fellow cast members. The audacity to challenge norms, to disrupt established hierarchies, would serve him well on stage, even as it earned him enemies off it. By the time he reached college, Cornelius Crane Chase had forged a clear identity: the irreverent, daring, and magnetic prankster who could command attention with a glance or a gesture. Yet the boy who could elicit laughter from a classroom still carried the shadows of a complicated childhood. Privilege had given him opportunity, yes, but it had also imposed expectation. Wealth had insulated him in some ways, but it had amplified isolation in others. In the crucible of his youth, Chase developed the resilience, wit, and audacity that would one day make him a household name, and also planted the seeds for the personal and professional struggles that would haunt him in later years. In the quiet corners of his memory, behind the laughter and the applause he would eventually earn, the boy who endured abuse, expulsion, and instability remained. And it was this complex mix of brilliance, pain, and defiance that would eventually propel him into the world of comedy, a world where the very qualities that had been shaped by privilege and trauma could finally find expression, and where the stakes of performance would become a mirror for the challenges of his own life. Chevy Chase's story, from the beginning, was never just about laughter. It was about survival, identity, and the intricate dance between genius and chaos. Chevy Chase's gift for comedy, honed through years of pranks, mischief, and keen observation, found its first serious outlet in college. At Bard College in New York, he discovered that his irreverent humor could flourish not just as a survival mechanism, but as a calling. There, surrounded by the freedom of an intellectually stimulating environment, Chase began performing skits, writing sketches, and developing the physical comedy that would one day make him a television icon. Friends and professors alike noticed his effortless timing, the way he could transform a mundane gesture into a moment of uproarious laughter. College, for the young prankster, was more than an education. It was a laboratory for experimentation, where creativity collided with audacity. After graduating, Chase's early career followed the path of a determined, restless comedian. He joined the National Lampoon Radio Hour, a proving ground for some of the most daring comedic talents of the era. Writing, performing, and collaborating with like-minded mavericks, he learned the delicate balance between improvisation and structure, between risk and payoff. These years were formative. The Radio Hour was not only a showcase of wit, but also a crucible of discipline. Chase thrived, but his ambition burned hotter than ever. He wanted more than recognition in print or on the airwaves. He wanted to be seen, to be known, to dominate the stage and screen. It was during this period, in a chance encounter that would alter the trajectory of his life, that Chase met Lorne Michaels, the visionary behind a new NBC sketch comedy series called Saturday Night Live. Michaels recognized in Chase a rare combination: the timing of a physical comedian, the sharpness of a writer, and the audacity of a performer unafraid to push boundaries. At a time when live television was an unforgiving arena, Chase's poise and confidence were magnetic. He possessed that uncanny ability to make audiences feel both complicit and amazed, as if they were in on a secret joke that only he could orchestrate. In 1975, when Saturday Night Live premiered, Chevy Chase became the face of a generation. His physicality, falling, slipping, and executing stunts with surgical precision, combined with his biting wit to create sketches that were both chaotic and controlled. From the very first episodes, viewers noticed a new kind of television presence: brash, irreverent, and unapologetically confident. Weekend Update, which Chase anchored with a mixture of deadpan seriousness and sly humor, became an instant cultural phenomenon. His signature line, "I'm Chevy Chase and you're not," delivered with perfect comedic timing, encapsulated the charm and audacity that made him unforgettable. Yet beneath the humor was a performer who thrived on high stakes. Live television left no room for error, and Chase's commitment to perfection was evident in every sketch. He was fearless, stepping into stunts that would intimidate even the most seasoned actors. He fell, he slipped, he improvised, all while making it look effortless. The audience roared, the critics praised, and within a year, he was hailed as the funniest man in America. Suddenly, the boy who had once survived a troubled childhood through humor was now in control of laughter on a national stage. NHOWEVER. Fame arrived with a double edge. Chase's meteoric rise fueled his ego, and clashes with fellow cast members soon became inevitable. John Belushi, Bill Murray, and other SNL contemporaries were brilliant in their own right, but Chevy's rapid ascent and growing self-assurance sometimes veered into arrogance. Tensions simmered behind the scenes, fueled by differing comedic philosophies and competitive instincts. While audiences saw a seamless, electrifying performance on screen, the backstage world was fraught with rivalry. Some admired his talent, others resented his swagger. This duality, adoration in public, friction in private, would become a recurring theme throughout Chase's career. Hollywood soon took notice. Film studios recognized that the man who could dominate live television had the charisma, timing, and physicality to carry movies. Offers poured in, often with eye-popping sums. In a remarkably short period, Chevy Chase transitioned from SNL's breakout star to Hollywood's golden boy. The timing could not have been more perfect. American audiences were hungry for a new breed of comedy that blended satire, physical humor, and an everyman sensibility, and Chase embodied all three. Yet, even as doors opened, Chase's past, the sharp edges of his upbringing, his innate need to command attention, and his tendency toward confrontation, followed him. He was a star, yes, but a complex one, charismatic, unpredictable, and prone to conflict. His early life had taught him the power of humor, but it had also instilled a deep-seated restlessness and desire for control. On SNL, this manifested in creative disagreements, assertive decisions on sketch content, and, at times, strained relationships with those who did not move at his pace. It was as if the show's live, unfiltered energy mirrored the chaos of his formative years, offering both triumph and tension in equal measure. By the end of his first year on Saturday Night Live, Chevy Chase was no longer just a performer. He was an institution. His sketches set the standard for comedy, his persona defined an era, and his physical humor became a template for generations to come. Yet the combination of extraordinary talent and personal complexity hinted at the challenges that lay ahead. Fame, after all, is both a reward and a magnifying glass. For Chevy Chase, SNL was the launchpad, the crucible, and the arena all at once, a place where brilliance was celebrated, ego was amplified, and the seeds of rivalry and controversy quietly took root. In those early years, one thing was undeniable. Chevy Chase had arrived, and he had arrived in a way that demanded attention. The boy who had once endured a turbulent childhood, who had survived strict discipline and expulsion, was now a comedic force with the nation watching. His journey from college prankster to television legend was more than a career. It was a statement. It was proof that talent, audacity, and a refusal to conform could transform personal history into cultural phenomenon. But as the world applauded, the shadows of his upbringing and the complications of sudden fame quietly lingered, foreshadowing the conflicts and controversies that would define his later life. By the late 1970s, Chevy Chase had moved from television's bright lights to Hollywood's glittering stages, and the industry quickly realized he was a rare breed of comedic actor, fearless, magnetic, and devastatingly precise. The transition wasn't always seamless. Live TV and scripted film demanded different skills, but Chase's natural timing and daring physicality translated effortlessly. Where other actors relied on charm or dialogue, he relied on an innate ability to inhabit comedy physically, to turn movement into laughter, to craft moments that were equal parts calculated and spontaneous. It was a talent that demanded notice, and Hollywood was watching. NHI's first major film success came with Foul Play in 1978, a thriller comedy that paired him with Goldie Hawn. Audiences responded to his everyman charm, his sly expressions, and his fearless approach to slapstick. Chase's performance struck a delicate balance between the absurd and the relatable. He could be clumsy without being foolish, charming without being smug. Critics noted the subtle intelligence behind his humor. Fans simply laughed, sometimes uncontrollably, at every carefully executed pratfall. The film's success solidified his reputation not just as an SNL star, but as a box office draw, someone who could carry a film with his presence alone. It was, however, Caddyshack in 1980 that would cement his status as a comedic icon. Directed by Harold Ramis, the film was a chaotic symphony of irreverence, satire, and outright hilarity. Chevy Chase played the affluent yet bumbling Ty Webb, a character whose dry wit and effortless timing contrasted perfectly with the film's outrageous energy. His deadpan delivery became a hallmark. Even in scenes of utter absurdity, his restraint heightened the humor, giving audiences a touchstone amid the chaos. Caddyshack was more than a hit. It was a cultural phenomenon. Lines were quoted endlessly, scenes replayed in classrooms, offices, and living rooms across America. Chase was no longer just a funny face on television. He was shaping American comedy itself. Following this, Chase's momentum accelerated with National Lampoon's Vacation, 1983, where he played Clark Griswold, the well-meaning but hapless patriarch of a family road trip. The film combined situational comedy, physical gags, and a subtle critique of suburban American life, and Chase's performance was the glue that held it together. Every mishap, every cringe-worthy misadventure, was amplified by his expressive reactions, his calculated timing, and his ability to oscillate between exasperation and hope. Audiences didn't just watch Clark Griswold, they felt his frustration, shared his optimism, and laughed at the universality of his misfortunes. The film was a financial and critical success, cementing Chase as a bankable star and a master of comedic relatability. In Fletch, 1985, Chase displayed a different facet of his talent, a quick-witted, sardonic protagonist whose humor relied less on physical comedy and more on razor-sharp dialogue. The film showcased his versatility, proving that he could command the screen through charisma, intelligence, and precise comedic timing. It was a reminder that Chase was not one-dimensional. He could be both the pratfalling everyman and the clever, quick-tongued observer, a performer capable of adapting to varied comedic styles without losing his unique voice. Hollywood, predictably, took notice. Studios competed for his involvement, offering million-dollar contracts and opportunities that few actors of his generation could dream of. Chase's star was rising at an almost vertiginous rate, and his name alone became synonymous with comedy itself. The era of Chevy Chase as one of the highest-paid actors in Hollywood was born, and with it came the intoxicating mix of fame, wealth, and creative freedom. Yet beneath the surface, the pressures and temptations of sudden success began to emerge. Chase's career was not without danger. Physical comedy, stunts, and pratfalls that thrilled audiences also carried real risks. On multiple sets, he sustained injuries, sprained ankles, bruised ribs, and near misses that could have ended his career prematurely. While his comedic genius demanded such risks, they also served as a reminder that the very performances audiences adored were, at times, physically punishing. Beyond the injuries, the trappings of Hollywood, lavish lifestyles, intense schedules, and easy access to substances added strain to his personal life. Chase was no stranger to excess, and the pressures of fame began to exacerbate long-standing personal struggles, from marital discord to the lure of opioids for both pain management and escapism. Despite these undercurrents, Chase's public persona remained untarnished. He was adored for his impeccable comedic instincts, his everyman appeal, and the energy he brought to every scene. But behind the laughter and box office triumphs, the first hints of ego-driven friction with colleagues began to surface. As success grew, so too did expectations, both self-imposed and external. Chevy's exacting standards and irrepressible confidence sometimes clashed with directors, co-stars, and production teams. What the world saw as brilliance was, behind closed doors, often complicated by clashes of personality, creative differences, and a tendency to assert control over his work. Yet even with these challenges, the 1980s belonged to Chevy Chase. His films shaped American comedy, his timing defined a generation, and his name became shorthand for intelligent, irreverent humor. Each role, from Caddyshack to Vacation to Fletch, reinforced his place in Hollywood's pantheon of comic actors. And while the pressures of fame and personal struggle quietly simmered beneath the surface, for the audience, Chevy Chase was untouchable, a master of laughter, a magician of timing, and an actor whose physicality and wit left an indelible mark on film history. Hollywood had crowned him a star, but it was precisely this combination of talent, ego, and relentless drive that would foreshadow the complications and controversies that lay ahead. The man who had conquered SNL, whose every pratfall elicited roars of laughter, was entering a world that demanded more than comedic brilliance. It demanded diplomacy, resilience, and restraint. And in these years of meteoric rise, Chevy Chase's greatest successes were inseparable from the seeds of the personal and professional turbulence that would later define his legacy. By the early 1990s, Chevy Chase's once brilliant career had begun to show cracks that no audience laughter could mask. The very traits that had propelled him to superstardom, confidence, irreverence, and a relentless drive for control, were now colliding with the realities of Hollywood and personal demons. The brashness that once charmed directors and co-stars increasingly alienated them, and Chase, once the golden boy of comedy, found himself navigating the sharp edges of ego, infamy, and public scrutiny. NTHE trouble began subtly, with small but telling incidents on set and in public appearances. Reports of tensions with fellow actors grew more frequent. punctuated by high-profile feuds with people who had once been collaborators or friends. John Belushi and Bill Murray, early SNL contemporaries, had always clashed with Chase's self-assured presence, but now, as his fame reached a peak, these rivalries hardened. Tales circulated of heated arguments over creative choices, improvisation, and billing, painting a portrait of an actor unwilling to compromise, whose sharp tongue could wound as effectively as his slapstick could entertain. And Chase's ambition for dominance extended to live events, most notoriously his disastrous hosting of the Academy Awards. Intended to showcase his wit on one of Hollywood's grandest stages, the performance instead became emblematic of his faltering judgment. Critics panned his timing, his jokes, and his apparent disregard for the flow of the ceremony. What was meant to cement his status as a leading comedic voice instead fed a growing narrative. Chevy Chase, once untouchable, was increasingly out of step with the very industry that had elevated him. The backlash stung, and though Chase had weathered criticism before, this moment marked a turning point, signaling that the shield of past success could no longer protect him. Around the same time, The Chevy Chase Show, a prime-time variety show launched in 1993, floundered spectacularly. Despite Chase's star power and name recognition, the show lasted only 5 weeks before being canceled. Behind the cameras, the production suffered from his perfectionism, his impatience, and frequent clashes with writers and producers. Chase's humor, which had thrived in films and on SNL, struggled to translate to this format. The public, once eager to cheer him on, now watched a promising project collapse under the weight of his temperament. Ratings plummeted, networks distanced themselves, and industry insiders whispered that Chase's reputation for difficult behavior had become more famous than his comedy. This period also highlighted the personal struggles that had long simmered beneath the surface. Injuries from earlier stunts, compounded by stress and physical demands, took a toll on his health. His relationships suffered. Marriages ended in bitterness, leaving emotional scars that mirrored the physical ones from his career's peak. Substance abuse, once manageable, began to interfere with both personal and professional life, creating a cycle of tension, erratic behavior, and public scrutiny. The laughter that had defined his work was now contrasted starkly with the headlines chronicling his struggles, from failed projects to public disputes. Perhaps most consequential were the roles he passed on, decisions that would haunt both him and Hollywood historians. Chevy Chase famously declined parts in now iconic films like Ghostbusters and Forrest Gump. While he later claimed artistic reasons, these choices reflected a combination of misjudgment and the hubris that often accompanies fame. Meanwhile, younger comedians and actors began rising to prominence, bringing fresh energy to an industry that Chase, despite his talent, struggled to navigate with the same relevance. His name, once synonymous with groundbreaking comedy, was increasingly associated with missed opportunities and professional volatility. The 1990s became a decade defined less by box office hits and more by headlines, negative press, on-set disputes, and tales of erratic behavior. Chase's reputation as a mercurial, sometimes combative figure overshadowed the genius that had once captivated audiences. Collaborators, wary of conflict, avoided him. Directors hesitated to cast him in leading roles, and the public, hungry for nostalgia but unforgiving of missteps, began to see him as a cautionary tale rather than a comedic trailblazer. Even a potential renaissance in the 2000s was complicated. When Community premiered in 2009, fans of Chase's earlier work were hopeful, seeing the project as an opportunity for redemption. Initially, he delivered flashes of his signature timing and wit. Yet behind the scenes, his behavior became a source of tension once again. Racist remarks toward co-star Donald Glover, repeated clashes with writers and the production team, and a refusal to adapt to the ensemble dynamic painted a familiar pattern. Talent marred by temperament, brilliance undermined by ego. What could have been a celebrated comeback instead fueled media scrutiny and reinforced the narrative of Chevy Chase as both a comedy legend and a troubled figure. And yet, despite this fall, the impact of his earlier work could not be erased. Chase's performances in SNL, Caddyshack, Vacation, and Fletch continued to influence comedians, writers, and actors. His timing, his physical comedy, and his fearless approach remained benchmarks for comedic excellence. It was a paradox central to his story. While he struggled personally and professionally, the art he created during his rise continued to shape the very culture that had moved on from him. Chevy Chase's trajectory is a study in contrasts. Meteoric rise and public adoration versus personal turmoil and professional volatility. He had once been untouchable, the funniest man in America, commanding stages and screens with ease. Yet fame, ego, and unresolved personal demons turned that very brilliance into a source of tension and conflict. The fall was not sudden but inevitable, an accumulation of decisions, missteps, and the relentless pressure of sustaining a public persona that often clashed with the man behind it. NBY, the end of the 1990s and into the 2000s, Chevy Chase had become a figure of fascination and caution. A comedy pioneer whose work shaped an era, yet whose personal and professional missteps served as a reminder that genius and self-destruction often walk hand in hand. The laughter that had once defined his career now resonated with a tinge of irony, illustrating the thin line between comedic brilliance and the cost of fame, a line Chevy Chase would navigate for the rest of his life, sometimes successfully, sometimes with the weight of history pressing down on every pratfall, every punchline, and every cross of ego and circumstance. Chevy Chase's story is a testament to the dizzying heights and perilous pitfalls of fame. From the privileged but turbulent beginnings of his childhood to the breakout glory of SNL, he carved a place in comedy history that few could rival. His timing, physical comedy, and fearless absurdity reshaped the way audiences laughed, and for a fleeting moment, he truly was untouchable. A cultural phenomenon, a star whose every move was watched, mimicked, and celebrated. Yet behind the laughter was a man grappling with ego, personal demons, and choices that steadily eroded the very platform that had elevated him. Missteps, conflicts, and public controversies transformed once adored brilliance into cautionary headlines. The films that once defined his career became a nostalgic backdrop against which his struggles played out. Even potential comebacks, like Community, highlighted the complexity of a legacy entangled with both genius and volatility. Today, Chevy Chase remains an emblem of comedy's paradox, groundbreaking talent shadowed by human flaws. His influence endures, teaching us that brilliance can illuminate and blind, that laughter can inspire but never erase the cost of fame. For fans, historians, and aspiring comedians alike, his life is a reminder that the line between legend and cautionary tale is often as thin as a punchline.